It's time for Supply Chain Now. Broadcasting live from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia. Heard around the world, Supply Chain Now spotlights the best in all things supply chain. The people, the technologies, the best practices, and the critical issues of the day. And now, here are your hosts.
Hey, good afternoon. Scott Luton and Greg White with you here on Supply Chain Now. Welcome back to today's show. Greg, how you doing?
I'm doing great. We just had a little discussion about golf, and now we're going to talk about supply chain, two of my favorite things. So let's go.
That's right. This episode continues our Supply Chain Cities series of programming where we spotlight some of the best things taking place in the Metro Atlanta community. However, it's all universally relevant, right, Greg?
Everything's relevant to me, Scott. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, we've got an outstanding and exceptional business leader who's based here in Atlanta, but in particular, you know, the sourcing and procurement space is a incredibly hot space in global supply chain. So looking forward to sharing some of his thought leadership with you. Some more to come on that in just a moment. Hey, quick programming note before we get started. If you enjoyed today's podcast, check us out and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. Greg, we publish just about every day as we look to cover the entire global supply chain community.
Yeah, we got a ton of series right now. So it's going to be more than once a day, but it won't always say Supply Chain Now right out front, right?
That's right. New series abound. Okay, so with no further ado, let's introduce our two special guests here today with us. Keith Saunders, Vice President for Sourcing, Direct Materials, and Sourced Finished Goods at Zep Incorporated. Keith, how you doing?
I'm pretty good. How you guys doing today?
Very good. Good to have you.
Doing fantastic. Great to have you here. Really have enjoyed the pre-show warm-up and looking forward to diving into your story here momentarily.
All right. Great.
Joining Keith is our dear friend, regular co-host, especially on the Supply Chain Cities series. We have Ben Harris, Director of the Supply Chain Ecosystem with the Metro Atlanta Chamber. Ben, how you doing?
Doing very well, Scott. It's good to be back.
Definitely. It's been too long.
Yes.
So much is going on, of course, not just in supply chain, but across the Metro Atlanta community. And
Absolutely.
I'm really excited about sharing this, one of the good things that's taking place. So I think our listeners are going to really enjoy Keith's thought leadership and some aspects of his journey.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, Zep is definitely essential to what's going on in Atlanta and makes a lot of essential things that we need very much so right now. So this is a very relevant discussion. Looking forward to it.
No doubt.
Good point. All right. So as we always like to start, let's let our audience have the opportunity to get to know Keith a little better, much like we enjoyed in the warm up. So, Keith, tell us, let's learn more about you. Where'd you grow up? And, give us the goods on your upbringing. Give us a story that maybe a lot of folks don't know about Keith Saunders.
Yeah. All right. So I'm from the Washington, D.C. area, but I actually grew up in North Carolina, actually a small little town in North Carolina called Norlana, North Carolina, which is, I guess, short for North Carolina, right? But it's right on the Virginia border of 85. So it's a kind of small farming community. Actually, only one high school and two middle schools in the whole county, right? But it was actually pretty cool, right, to go from a big city like that to a little small farming community. In terms of a couple of things about me, like one of the things that I'm really proud of, and I always have to give a shout out, I actually went to high school at North Carolina School of Science and Math. It was the first high school of its kind in the country. Took students in the 11th and 12th grade that showed aptitudes for, science and math and, some of the other categories and allowed them to live on campus for 2 years. We went through, an application process and interview process and, everything else. And, at the time, I think the typical graduating class was 250 students. So they would take 250 kids every year from across the state. And, we lived together basically for 2 years. So
really,
I always have to shout out North Carolina School of Science and Math because I think that they really put me on the path that I'm currently on, in terms of the journey that, I've had so far, and what I imagine is the journey that I'll continue to have.
All right, so I've got to ask something on that, Keith. Do you still? There's so many things to talk about that, but do you still keep in touch with some of the folks that you went through that prestigious program with?
I do. Some of the people, that I met there, I think are going to be lifelong friends. I compare it to, there are a handful of kids or people that I still talk to from elementary school, right? But there are probably 10 people that I can constantly or consistently talk to from the School of Science and Math. Again, we basically, lived together for, years, right? So it was college before, college. So to a certain extent, I'm not going to say I was off on, I was on my own at the age of 16, but, certainly I was in a college type environment, at the age of 16. And we were a couple of blocks away from, Duke University. So we would sneak over there and, play basketball and, some of their outdoor facilities. And it was an amazing experience.
So you mean you would play sports whenever you weren't getting even further ahead of us that we're not good at science and math. So what a special opportunity that was for you. It's a 2-year program. Is that right, Keith?
Correct. So it was your junior and senior year of high school.
All right. So
that
now
was essentially the first STEM focused high school then. I mean, if you think about it from that standpoint, that was a STEM, essentially a STEM program.
Yeah, it was. And like I said, I think that for especially kids coming from smaller communities that didn't have possibly some of the resources that some of the larger schools had, it was a tremendous opportunity. So when you compare, maybe the impact that it had on me versus the impact that it may have had on kids coming from, Raleigh or Durham or Chapel Hill, the impact may have been, larger for me because there were some things that I had an opportunity to experience that, maybe at my high school or my home high school, I would not have been able to experience just because we didn't have the resources.
Yep. All right.
And that's no small drive from home either. It's not like you could go home and have mom do your laundry over the weekend from college.
Exactly. Yeah. And, and one of the crazy things is since then, there have been a couple of states who kind of copied that model. So, we're definitely not the only one anymore. We'll always be the first. But in addition to that, we've actually also opened a second science and math. Is the West Campus versus the one in Greensboro. So it's grown, and again, I can't tell you how proud I am to be a part of to be one of the alumni.
Yeah, as well you should.
So before Greg dives deeper into your professional journey, after you graduated this prestigious Academy for Science and Math, and really were a trailblazer, which is really interesting to hear about, you went on to North Carolina A&T. Is that right, Keith?
I did. Before I went to A&T, I actually went to NC State. So the great thing about Science and Math, everybody goes to one of, a handful of schools, right? So everybody goes to Duke, Carolina, NC State, or A&T for the most part, right? And then, of course, there are people that go to some of your Ivy League schools, and, they're a lot more special, I guess. But for a lot of us, for the kids that would go to the state schools, those were, pretty much the schools that we would go to. So I started off in NC State, had an amazing time, probably too amazing of a time, to be perfectly honest.
I
think that I think my priorities probably weren't where they needed to be. I never worried about graduating, but I did worry about, not being quite as focused as I should be. So, after my sophomore year, I decided to transfer. And to be perfectly honest, probably one of the best decisions I've ever made. So, outside of the North Carolina School of Science and Math, North Carolina A&T State University, Aggie pride, certainly has my heart.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Well, so let's, that's cool. Off the air, we'll talk about the alignment between our college careers. But let's talk about your professional journey now. So, tell us about maybe some of the most important or pivotal roles that you had. Let's start with that, right?
Yeah.
And how you feel like that might have shaped your professional journey.
Yeah, I think because I'm an engineer, by training, I feel like I can do anything, right, to be perfectly honest. And so I'm a chemical engineer. I have a BS and MS in chemical engineering. But when I went to school, actually, my intent was to do chemical engineering and then go to dental school. Probably wasn't as well thought out, maybe as it should have been. But, I really enjoyed, the coursework, right? I think that chemical engineering is one of the more challenging curriculums, but, it is also, one where it really tests your imagination. So I really enjoyed it. The first job that I had as an engineer, though, I was working on my master's at the time. And by the time I finished my master's, I realized I didn't want to be an engineer. I enjoyed the coursework, but the actual application, I realized that probably not what I wanted to do. But again, I think having that engineering background gave me the confidence to know that I could probably do something else and I would be okay. So I moved from engineering to consulting, which was totally different just in terms of, the day-to-day activity. So did consulting for a little while, but I was building websites and, things like that, and, realized that I didn't want to do that either. Had an opportunity to, went back to school, got my MBA. Had an opportunity to intern at Intel, and that's kind of where, everything, kind of came together. I interned on the sourcing team, but I was actually the technical resource, and I felt like, hey, this makes a little bit more sense for me. And then when I went to Intel full time, it was actually on the commercial side, and I became a sourcing leader, and I was responsible for the chemicals that were used in production. And it was kind of a perfect match, right? Because I think, one of the things that I've realized is, relationships are everything in this business. So it kind of fit my personality in addition to, those technical pieces, and it just worked out really well. And, Intel was a great training ground. It was kind of one of those places where they just throw you in and you have to figure it out. But it was a great opportunity for me. Since then, of course, have had an opportunity to do a couple of different things, but have pretty much stayed within that chemicals realm for the most part, or haven't gotten very far from it. I've sourced everything from surfactants to dyes to, a little bit of everything. But I've had an opportunity to work for some really good companies and some really good people, right? So from Intel to Newell Rubbermaid, to Ingersoll Rand, to Pall, to Zep, every place that I've gone, I've had an opportunity to learn and develop, and hopefully every place that I've been, they can definitely say that I've left a mark from a sourcing perspective, but then also they can say that I've left a mark in terms of those interpersonal relationships that we developed during those times.
Keith, is having a degree in chemicals like that, has that served you well? Being in a supply chain capacity for a chemicals company? It seems like you wouldn't have to know necessarily about that, but I'm sure for you it's been good though.
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely has. And to be honest, I'm not sure if some of the doors that have been opened would have been opened if it were not for the background. Certainly, and I tell people that I hire, a lot of times that, sourcing is sourcing, right? So I'm not as concerned about your past in sourcing a particular widget, right? I'm more concerned about your ability to process data and to think things through and your willingness to, get it done, right? But I think from a resume perspective, certainly there have been some opportunities that have arisen, because of my background.
Got it.
So I was fascinated, Ben, I'm sure you heard this too. I was fascinated by this fact that you said chemical engineering kind of activates your imagination. I don't know that I've ever heard those two words in the same sentence, engineering and imagination, but so give me, clearly you have used some of that. And I have a whole nother question. We know what your pivotal moment was when you were in school, before you started your career. I want to ask you about that in just a second. But before we do that, I'd like to understand, tell me how you've used that ignition of creativity in your career, in imagination.
Well, I think that what any engineer, what they do is problem solve, right? And the thing that engineering teaches you is that there is no one way to solve a problem. There have been, many instances, over the years where I think that typically sourcing managers, whenever they want to go to or achieve a certain amount of cost savings, they automatically go to RFP. Right, because that's typically the easiest thing to do. Figure out what the market says, and the market says the price should be, and just try to beat them down on price, and come up with the lowest cost available. Yeah. Versus understanding that, hey, if that is a way, right, but what you are doing at that point is kind of locking yourself into what's already available versus trying to understand if there's, another opportunity. Is there another way to do it, right? Is there, perhaps another material outside of the material that you're using that can give you, similar or better benefits and going to also provide you the cost savings that you're looking for, right? I think that, typically we want to go down a path because that's the path that we've always gone down. But I think that the great thing about engineering is it shows you that, okay, that there is this one path, but, let's figure out if there's another way to get there, because sometimes there are roadblocks on the path that you are, trying to go on. And certainly having the ability to remove roadblocks is, key. But, in some instances, the effort required to move those roadblocks make it really not worthwhile, even though the goal doesn't change. So your ability to understand that there is more than, one way to skin this cat, and to believe it, right, is going to be key in order for you to be successful.
That's awesome. It's not that engineers don't have imagination. You just don't, as a non-engineer, I just never really thought of it that way, but it really is that constant search for a solution. Yeah. That really
is weird, right? Yes, it's weird because my wife, tells me all the time that she hates, when she was younger, she didn't like dating engineers because, we were tended to be a little bit dry, and we had problems communicating. Which may be true to a certain extent, right? Because we are really data driven, but at the same time, I think that, data can tell more than one story, right? And you just have to be able to decipher the stories that it's telling. So, I think that's what engineering does. It gives you, it teaches you to look at the data in multiple ways to get to wherever you're trying to go.
That's a really good perspective. All right, so I have a feeling that the answer to this could be multiple choice, but I have to ask you, what was that, if you can name one, or if you can't, name a couple, but what was sort of a pivotal or eureka moment in your career? Something that kind of shifted your worldview or your direction in your career or something like that.
Yeah. Well, there are a couple, right? But I'm going to tell you a conversation that I had, and I don't even remember the guy's name, but I was at a conference several years ago, and just having a conversation. He was an executive at Delta, and we were just talking about some things that were going on within the industry. We were talking about career and career path, and he said there are three things that you should look at whenever you are considering leaving or joining an organization. And he said the first one is, does what you do make a difference? Can you have the opportunity to make an impact? Will you be treated fairly, or are you going to be treated fairly? And three, will you be developed, or are you being developed, right? So whether you're thinking about leaving or whether you're thinking about joining another organization, those are the three things that you need to consider. And he said, now notice, I didn't say anything about money, right? Because money comes, right? I mean, everybody loves money. Believe me, I get it. I'm not taking less money to do, a job because I like it, right? But money should not be the driving factor. It's the impact that you're going to have, and to know that, you're going to have the ability to become better and better at whatever it is that you want to do, and to know that you're going to be treated fairly while you're in that organization. And, honestly, that has driven, my decision making ever since I had that conversation. And I think as a result, again, I found myself in, some pretty good positions in terms of, the work environment that I've been in, and the opportunity for me to be developed. And, quite honestly, in some instances, it's you're looking for an opportunity to show what you can do. But I use those guiding principles, and it's, worked very well.
Well, clearly, I mean, you just look at your resume: Newell Rubbermaid, Ingersoll Rand, Zep, Intel. Clearly something is going right there. So that's good. And that it's interesting. You don't remember the cat's name, but it was that impactful. It's fascinating how those kind of things can impact your life, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It is.
So, all right. So now I'm going to ask you about somebody whose name you better remember, because I'm thinking of a colleague or a mentor or somebody like that has had a big impact on your life, and kind of what that taught you.
Yeah. I had a manager at Intel. His name was Jeffrey Sopko. And when I arrived at Intel, we were on the same team, but he wasn't managing, but he was, he was on the team. And I think probably within that first year, I probably had 4 different managers.
Wow.
But at some point, I began reporting to him. And, again, Intel is one of those places where it kind of just throws you in there, and, it's sink or swim. You got to figure it out. But he was probably, definitely the first person to kind of, try to slow it down a little bit, just to say, hey, let's walk through, the process, and, make sure that you understand really what the goal is, right? Because before that, the only thing that I thought I needed to do was to, negotiate the best price, right? Whereas he really helped me understand that there is really a strategic piece to it, right? So it's not just chasing parts or chemicals and trying to beat the supplier up for 10 cents a pound. It's more of, hey, what does it look like today? What do you want it to look like 3 years from now, 5 years from now? And how to kind of build your plan in order to achieve it, right? And in some ways, certainly, what he taught me at that point, again, has helped me build on, what I've done ever since. But in addition to that, he helped me realize that, hey, relationships are everything, right? So even if we don't agree today on something, that doesn't mean that, 2 years from now, we can't come together and, work on something else. But if you burn those bridges, it's going to be a lot more difficult to come back 2 years later.
Hey, Greg, real quick, what Keith is sharing as it relates to kind of the bigger picture partnership and far beyond just price as it relates to, building relationships within companies, reminds me of Aura with Omnia Partners and some of their
thinking
approach.
That exact same thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's Keith, it's really refreshing to hear your forward-looking, bigger picture approach to sourcing and procurement where, price is important. It's always important. Yeah. But far beyond, as Jeffrey was sharing with you earlier in your career, hey, where are you 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the road? And it's about this. It's about the relationship and the give and take across the board that takes place in those really meaningful relationships, right?
Yep, exactly.
Life.
And it's funny because there hurricanes happen, pandemics happen, a lot of different things happen, and you can have contracts in place, and once they declare force majeure, that contract they'll do the best they can, right? But there will always be suppliers who maybe have lost along the way. But if you have the right relationships in place, you can always go back to them and they can help you out. So, it's very important, right, to manage relationships. You don't necessarily have to be best friends with everyone, but I think it's important that everybody agrees that that they've been treated fairly and that they have been treated respectfully, right? And I would like to think that everybody that I've dealt with would certainly say that, right?
That's well said, Keith. Yeah. Speaking of relationships and so forth, I mean, currently with you at Zep Inc. right now, how's the relationship been with you and your work at Zep currently, and kind of what does that look like for you guys?
Ah, man, work is busy. Right, I'll say that. Right, as bad as the pandemic has been, globally, right? I mean, and certainly, I don't think that there are a lot of people that would disagree that, this is detrimental, right, for humankind. On the flip side, from a business perspective, we've made a whole lot of hand sanitizer here in the last couple of months.
That's probably a good point too, Keith. For some of our listeners here to take a step back and just talk about Zep, the company as a whole. Kind of who you were before, COVID, and then kind of who you are now. But if you just take a quick step back and talk about kind of the Zep, the company, that would be great. Yeah,
well, so Zep is basically a cleaning company. Right, at its core, that's what we do is we produce mainly cleaning chemicals, but also cleaning systems and cleaning solutions. Right, we have 4 business units. We have a B2B group that's called North America Sales and Service, which is the foundation of Zep. At one point, we had over 1,000 salespeople, kind of going door to door selling cleaning supplies. The founder of that actually used to ride a bike around, and he had a little basket in front of the bike, and he had his cleaning chemicals, and he'd go door to door selling. right?
Y'all might need to go back to that, Keith. At this point, that might be pretty effective, actually. We seem to have brought back the milkman, so we might need to bring back the door-to-door cleaning supplies as well.
You know what? It's probably easier to just put it on Amazon these days and let Amazon deliver it. But so we have that B2B side, and again, it's mainly cleaning chemistry. We have retail, which basically sells a lot of the same things that the B2B group sells. Again, focused on cleaning chemistry. But then we also have the food and bev group, which is cleaning and sanitation chemicals for food manufacturers. So if you go into a chicken plant or a beef processing plant, very good chance that they're using, a Zep branded material in there. And then we also do Zep vehicle care, which is car wash chemistry, right? So cleaning, sanitizing, disinfecting is a core competency. But to be honest, over the last, what we produce now in hand sanitizer in a week is probably equivalent to what we did all of last year, right? So think about the sheer scale in terms of how much demand has been out there versus, what we were doing last year, or even versus what we've been able to, accomplish, right? Because we're at a point where we can pretty much sell everything that we can make. And developing, that supply chain over the last couple of months has been, a challenge to say the least, because, we had suppliers who had been used to shipping us, quarter truckload of product, and now we're asking for multiple truckloads per week, right? So it's been a challenge to get, some of those suppliers ramped up. So we've had to go out and find new suppliers and, stuff like that. So to go back to the original question, business is good, in terms of, what's going on, within, my group. It's been a lot of, I'm not going to say sleepless nights, but not a lot of sleep, right? Because it's just been, so much going on.
Well, speaking of that, Keith, what is that? I'm sorry, Scott, go ahead.
Real quick, because I know Greg is itching to say something, because it's so important what he just shared there. I think a lot of folks that may tuned in that maybe they're not supply chain professionals, maybe it's the first time they're listening to our show. It is really important. The context is this historical level of demand across a wide variety of products. And what Keith was just sharing, I think I've got it right, where in some cases a supplier is used to sending his facility or his facilities a half truckload of something very infrequently. All of a sudden they need several truckloads of that per week just to try to meet this historical record-breaking levels of demand we're seeing across so many different product lines. So I always like to throw that in, Greg. I know you do too, because a lot of folks just don't quite know exactly how supply chains work, and they assume incorrectly often the times that it's a supply issue, and that's just not the case.
Well, ramping a supply chain to that scale, you don't just multiply by 52,
right?
And it works, right? I mean, that puts a strain on a supply chain that it was not built for. My immediate question when you said that was, are your production lines or your vendors, your suppliers' production lines even built for that kind of scale? Because that kind of scale takes different indirect materials. It takes different conveyors and machines and devices and mixing, because you have a lot of chemicals, right? It takes different size mixing vats and things like that. So you're absolutely right, Scott. It's a lot to consider, right? I have to go back to this one thing, the thing that Jeffrey was telling you about, just real quick. It's because my great-grandfather said this to me when I was a kid: life is bigger than this moment. And that's essentially what Jeffrey was telling you, right? It's so much bigger than just this moment. Even when you ignited that thought was when you said, we can disagree now and we might not have anything we can do together for a couple of years, but we know the relationship is there and it's valued enough that we'll come back to it. So sorry to take us all the way back there, but that was just so poignant. I had to talk about that.
But I think it's key. I think that it's important for everyone to not just recognize that, but to embrace it as well. Because, again, we might not be able to do business together today for whatever reason, right? Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that, there won't be an opportunity that's going to be mutually advantageous for us, next year or the year after. So, don't burn those bridges, because you never know when you have to run back and say, all
cross back over that creek.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, Ben. I didn't mean to overtake your segment of the conversation, but
no, this is the whole point of us having a
man. It's just there's just so much there. I mean, Keith, you have really lived and experienced and really drank in a lot. Really have internalized a lot of what you've learned about. So it's great having this discussion.
Yeah, no, and it's been great, and I think just in terms of like some of the things that I do now, again, it goes back to just problem solving, right? And so whether it is finding canisters for wipes or finding alcohol for hand sanitizer, I have a team that, we're responsible for, developing the strategy for, what we want things to look like a couple of years from now, but we're also responsible for making sure that the plant has material for what we want to produce today. Mm-hmm. And, with the pandemic and, this, certainly, we'll just call it unforecasted demand, but we've had to do everything from work our contracted suppliers to just get on the phone and just call. We basically cold called, producers all around the country, and some instances around the world, just trying to, find, different materials, right? So it's not always sexy, but, at the end of the day, it's about getting it done and supporting, the facilities so that, our end customers get the product that they want. It's been certainly a challenge, but, I think even for my team, I think that, they'll walk away from it and feel like, oh, man, we did an amazing thing, but then they'll also be able to look back on the experience and pull from that experience when, things get tough again, right? Because it's cyclical. At some point things will get better, but then, they'll get tough again. But, certainly this is an example of kind of going through the wars, and if they make it through this, they'll be able to make it through anything.
Good point.
All right. So Ben, before I'm going to ask him, Keith, something about RFP and sourcing versus procurement, but I know you had another question or so related to this current role, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask you also, Keith, you kind of talked about your current role, and it's kind of unpredictable, honestly. With cold calling and things like that. But, what is a typical day? If we had to say a typical day in the life of Keith Saunders, kind of before and after, like what does that kind of look like? Where do you kind of spend your time? What does your calendar look like?
Yeah, my calendar is filled with meetings, right? It's amazing because I'm not sure when we're actually supposed to do the work, because it seems like I'm always
I think we all feel like that.
Amen. We're all on Zoom calls all the time.
That's right.
But I think that there are a couple of things that I try to get done every day. So there are, I try to keep up with, current events, understand what's going on. Sometimes it's supply chain related. Sometimes it's, just things that are going on in finance or, whatever, right? I think that it's important to, really understand what's going on in the markets around you. I spend, quite a bit of time in terms of getting updates and providing updates So the communication piece is, extremely important. Being able to understand, from an executive team perspective, where we are and where we're trying to go, and to be able to, really filter that down into tasks and strategies for my team. Then also there's the interaction, with my team. Again, I'm responsible for chemicals. I'm responsible for packaging. I'm responsible for source finished goods and new product development. Each of, my team members, I encourage them to view their responsibilities as if it was their own little private company. And hey, I mean, how would you run it if it was your company? But to be able to sit down and kind of have some conversations with them about what they're working on and some of the roadblocks that they're having, and to get feedback from them in terms of what can I do to enable them to achieve some of the things that they have to achieve for the day. And then, just taking stuff off of their plate and trying to get stuff done for them. So I kind of consider myself like a player coach, mm-hmm. right? Because I coach, I provide direction, but, at the same time, I take direction based on what it is that they need. So it's a lot of running around, listening to what other people need and trying to figure out, how to get it for them. But then, again, there is that problem solving piece where, I spend a lot of time just trying to figure out, well, okay, here's where we are, here's where we're trying to go, figure out all of the steps in between and make sure that those are, communicated effectively. Mm. So, a lot going on.
Yeah. Sounds like it, and we're just probably scratching the surface. Hey, Keith, I want you to weigh in on something. I worked for a manufacturer years ago, and I had a couple folks on our team that we worked with that were just incredible at going out and finding new suppliers, vetting them, in some cases, going out and touring their facilities, and then getting them into our supply chain, which really gave us a lot of flexibility and allowed us to serve the customer in a more creative and successful manner. You mentioned RFPs earlier in some of your thoughts, and can you speak to how, an RFP doesn't work like a magic wand? You may not have all the folks that you need or all the candidates to satisfy a certain specific need in the business that are going to definitely respond to the RFP. You've got to get out there, and you were talking earlier about making those calls. You kind of got to shake the trees and find some of these suppliers sometimes, right?
Yeah. And so, recognize the RFP is a tool, right? But there are a lot of tools in that sourcing toolbox. Sometimes really what you need to do is look at developing something else, right? So in some instances, it's going to be difficult to, come up with something different, right? But in a lot of instances, really what we need to be looking at is, really thinking outside of the box, right? And so whether it is saying, for example, delaminine is a solvent that, is used in a lot of degreasers, right? Certainly you can go to the typical traders, right, that sell delaminine and figure out who has the best cost today. Or you could also go to producers to see what they're able to do. You can go to people that actually use the orange juice and figure out what they are, or determine what they are doing with the waste product, which in many instances you're able to pull the delaminine from. Mm-hmm. You can look at global sourcing and identify who's doing what where. And, you can make them part of the RFP, or you can partner with people who view delaminine as a waste product versus a actual value add material, right? So it's really kind of stepping outside of that normal, hey, I'm sending it out to 5 different suppliers to see what they can do, versus looking at it from a larger perspective and really figuring out what it is that you're trying to achieve and what's going to give you the competitive advantage. And I think that that's really the key, right, is trying to figure out what's going to give you the competitive advantage. And, you know, sometimes you only get one project like that a year. Maybe it's one project like that every other year, right? But normally when you get it done, it's going to be something that's going to have a significant impact on the business for, you know, a couple of years to come.
Love it. All right. Keith, I appreciate you shedding some light on that. We're going to shift gears at this point. And you did a beautiful job foreshadowing this in your time at Intel. You really did. I mean, couldn't ask for anything better. So here recently we celebrated National Internship Day, or Intern Day, which I got to admit, this is a new one for me. We've got a couple of incredible interns here at Supply Chain Now. So tip of the hat to Genoa and to Devin. Really appreciate all they bring.
We didn't get them a card, so this will have to do, gang.
That's right. So Keith, to use your words, as you were interning, or at least whether it was as you were interning Intel or your early career time there, you mentioned, quote, that's kind of where it all came together, end quote.
Yeah.
Can you speak to the value of internship programs, and can you challenge organizations that may not currently offer internship programs while that they need to do so? Yeah.
You know, I think that there is a obvious, I mean, in my opinion, there's an obvious value in the internship programs for both parties involved, right? So for the students that are getting an opportunity to get experience in their field of study, it gives them an opportunity to understand exactly what it is that they're going to be doing outside of just reading about these theoretical situations in a textbook. For the companies involved, it gets, you know, to be perfectly honest, it gets them some relatively cheap labor, right? It gets them relatively cheap labor, but what it also does, it gives them an opportunity to see some of these students before they hit the open market, right? And so if you get interns in and they do a really good job, you know, normally they're going to be yours to lose if, you know, you want to bring them in, right? Certainly, I think that for, you know, the students, if they have an opportunity to intern, I mean, that development clock starts much sooner. So when they come in, you know, after graduation, you're not teaching them as if they're starting day one, because they're already, in some instances, you know, after 2 internship sessions, you can consider it a year in, right? Yeah. So they already know, you know, what's going on. They know the right people within the organization, you know, who they need to talk to for whatever, right? But for those students, it's invaluable because, you know, you may think you know what chemical engineering is, but until you spent some time in that plant, you really don't. Right. Or, you know, whether it's finance, engineering, or, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
You know what it is. But, you know, until you've been given, you know, this project to work on, you really don't know what you've gotten yourself into. And it's important for the students. So, you know, again, they have an idea of what they'll be walking into after graduation. But it's really good, you know, for, you know, the companies, because really what it does, it gives you a pipeline into, you know, this new talent, right? And, you know, and I think that, you know, new talent is important because while it's good to have people with experience, in many instances, those people with experience base everything off of the experience that they have versus having new ideas. And the kids that come in, they'll always ask why, right? And if you don't have a good explanation for why, then maybe you need to do something different.
Why not? Right?
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
All right. So
blessing of naivete.
That's right.
The beauty of an internship.
Yeah.
Greg and Ben, did y'all intern earlier in your career?
I did actually at Georgia Tech, at the Georgia Tech Research Institute, or otherwise known as GTRI. Did that for 2 summers. Actually, then I worked starting when I was 16, also at what is now Dick's Sporting Goods. Originally, it was Galleons.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Outstanding.
Interesting. So
I
Intel.
did not.
Okay.
Because I wanted to intern with the CIA, and they had to kill you after you were.
Wow. Good excuse, Greg.
No kid.
Hey, I'd like to add one thing
Yeah.
about internships, because we, at every company that I've ever run, we've used internships significantly for all of the reasons that Keith presented. And one of the things that's important is I think there is this sort of grand mystery around internships. And the fact is, if 2 people come together and that one person, the student, is willing to go back to the career center at their school and say, I'd like class credit for this, it's as simple as that. That's an internship. A lot of people think it has to be an IBM or an Intel formal internship,
Right.
Or that you have to go to a career fair, and you don't. You just have to find somebody who has interest, or you have interest in them, and then have them reach out to their professor or their, or their career advisor, and it's an internship just like that. It's really that simple.
It's good points there, and there's a ton. I mean, it's like the notion of reverse mentoring, which I know is a pretty big deal these days. We've learned so much from just that different point of view, and how they approach what we do, how they approach some of the challenges in our business, and how they see the opportunity in the market. It's been fascinating summer for us, and learning from our interns. All right, so Keith, anything before we shift gears, and we're gonna kind of broaden the conversation up just a bit. Any final words, or if you want to throw the gauntlet down and challenge companies, if they're not, to utilize these bright young minds that can bring so much to the table?
Yeah, well, I would definitely say if you're not hiring at least 1 or more interns every year, you are missing the boat, because that's where the talent is. You want to be able to bring them in and mold them like you want. So it's better to get them in, better to get them while they're young. So definitely you should be invested in internships.
Yeah, no doubt. Especially if you can work at a cool place like Galleons. Man, I miss that store. So Keith, tell us a little bit, as we start to kind of close here. We love to ask our guests to break out their crystal ball, or to give us some thoughts on current events or news or trends, or what you see in the future. What's got mind share for you? What outside of your day to day are you burning cycles on to kind of think about or consider?
All right, so I'm going to answer that 2 ways, right? So what has my attention currently is, the U.S.'s relationship with China, because I think that that's going to have a huge impact on supply chain for years to come. I think that, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when we kind of drew the line in the sand to say, hey, there's going to be some changes in terms of our trade situation with China, I don't think that anyone really thought that it would kind of drag out the way that it has. And if anything, the tensions have kind of increased. So it's good and it's bad, right? Because, certainly there is more production domestically. But I think that the challenge is, I'm not sure if you can get all of the production needed domestically within the time frame in which, things really escalate, and how they could impact the overall supply chain, right? So, for us, we're starting to look at not just ways to mitigate that risk from a domestic perspective, but looking at, alternative global sources. But again, I think that there is so much that comes out of China that, the 2 biggest trading partners in the world, if we can't figure this out, it's going to be interesting to see, how things, kind of fall out moving forward. On less
that's a big one.
On less of a supply chain side, I'm also looking at, how the economy, is doing in the light of COVID. So I think that, most people were hoping that after the initial lockdown that we would see, those numbers start to fall and that we would get to some type of new normal, probably second half of the year. And as of now, I would imagine that that's not going to happen. Certainly, I think that we're trying to find a political solution to ensure that, the economy stays on track, or that the negative impacts will be minimized. But I'm not sure if, I'm 100% bought in that, the things that we're doing will be able to hold, everything together. So when you look at, what the unemployment rate is, even though it's improved, I'm not sure how sustainable it is, right? So, like everybody else, I'm looking at my 401k every day, and it's not pleasant, but, at the same time, I do believe in, and I guess this is something that Warren Buffett said, maybe, you'll always bet on the resiliency of the American people. And I kind of follow that mindset, but at the same time, I'm also looking at where the opportunities may be, right? Mm-hmm. And so, just trying to understand what's going on and how to best, position, my categories at work, as well as, my own personal, stuff, how to best take advantage of the situation as it currently is.
Yeah.
There's
a lot there. We could need to add on a second hour to unpack some of that stuff, Keith. But really, what Keith just shared there, Ben and Greg, really is, in a nutshell, the world that supply chain leaders find themselves in, right? They're tracking a variety of macro and micro challenges as they're trying to take care of the enterprise. In this case, a global enterprise that it's not as simple as what a lot of folks what supply chain used to be, perhaps. Right. So Keith, I can really appreciate that well thought out. Hey, this is kind of some of the things between my ears, night in and night out. All right, before we start to close, Ben and Greg, I want to get you off real quick to respond to somewhat you just heard there from Keith on either one of those things. And Ben, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, Keith, I think what you were saying was most interesting around reliability at this point, and the lack thereof, the amount of uncertainty in the market. As logisticians and supply chain practitioners out there, we want certainty. That we like for things to, from a sourcing standpoint, to be able to go to reliable people, reliable companies, to have a reliable quantity, whether it's a perfect order or whatever that may be. And right now we don't have that at all. So here we are, Keith, I think with you illustrating that, talking about, being on the phone a lot, that your day is filled with even more uncertainty. Right. That you're doing things that you haven't done, pre-COVID before, as far as new sourcing alternatives, new strategies that you've been employing there also. And I think that was really illustrated the way you did that more on a macro scale, with the way you wrapped that up, kind of, with the economy as a whole. So I think we're all feeling that too, Keith. So that was thought that was really really well done.
Good stuff there, Ben. And Greg, anything that really stuck out in Keith's answer to you?
Yeah, I think the macro perspective of it. I mean, you don't think of us little supply chain folks, right, sitting around our office thinking about world problems. But the truth is, particularly in your industry, Keith, world problems do impact the business, right?
Oh yeah.
And the, that really just kind of awakened me just a little bit, that we always need to be thinking about that. And Keith lives it every single day. And things like the relationship with China, not just tariffs, but the debt that we owe to China and those other dynamics that impact that. He has to consider things like that to determine things like sourcing and production, because some of those things, maybe at least certain aspects of that relationship, may or may not be able to be resolved in the next decade or two.
That's right.
So you have to think about those kind of things, and I think that's good. It's good for our audience, for those of them who aren't deep supply chain practitioners, and maybe even some who are, to recognize that these are very, very complex issues in a global trade world, that we have to consider every day. It's not just your supplier; it's the flag under which that supplier works. Right? It could be a number of things.
Certainly.
All right. So before we wrap up, make sure our audience knows how to get in touch and connect with both Keith and Ben and your respective organizations. Ben, I want to get your take here. You and the team over at the Metro Atlanta Chamber have no shortage of projects that benefit all aspects of the business, but certainly a lot impacting the supply chain city here. What's the latest that you can share with us?
So we've got I'll tease something for you real quick. We have a report that we're jointly publishing with the Georgia Department of Economic Development and, of course, the Logistics Innovation Center there. Actually, one of my former employer, oddly enough. So we've kind of come together. They were working on a project around the supply side of supply chain and logistics education, just understanding in the state of Georgia the amount of resources that are at our disposal from educational institutions or programs and things of that nature, and trying to illustrate that basically with what we're calling a supply chain and logistics education guide or report. Mm-hmm. It's kind of TBD on the exact name for it, but they were working on the kind of the supply side of that equation, then also the demand side of that equation. Also, we talk about students and people who want to be in supply chain as a career, or maybe they're in another career and want to come over to supply chain. This guide will help folks understand kind of two key, there's kind of two key goals for the report is helping economic developers around Metro Atlanta or the state or nationally, or supply chain consultants out there or site selection consultants understand the amount of supply chain and logistics educational resources we have here in the state of Georgia. And then, of course, the secondary audience will be actually practitioners of supply chain or students of supply chain or folks that want to be in supply chain as a career. So we're really excited about that report that should be published here. We're gunning for CSCMP, their CSCMP Edge Conference nationally, which is September 20th through the 23rd, I believe. That's, of course, they're going virtual this year. But that is the goal date for us to release that report. So I wanted to at least kind of tease that a little bit for you guys and give you a quick preview, but we'll have a little more on that coming up soon. But we're really excited about that joint report, publishing that together.
Outstanding, and looking forward to the tying with CSCMP. We are looking forward to interviewing Rick Blasgen in the weeks to come to get his take on what the neat things, much like you've been in the Metro Atlanta Chamber, some neat things that CSCMP is doing to make sure we fill up that talent pipeline with the best and the brightest. We got to compete as an industry for the best of the best when it comes to talent, and rightfully so, because the industry offers some of the best opportunities around. Right. So, all right, good stuff there from Ben and the Chamber. Greg, before we wrap up here and make sure folks can connect with Ben and Keith, any final comments on your end?
Yeah, I have one final question, and that is for each of the four of us, considering all the educational programs that are out there now specialized in supply chain, how many of you are happy you're already in because you think it would be difficult to get in this industry right now?
Oh, right? Man. Absolutely.
The quality of students that we're seeing coming out of these schools is unfathomable. Genoa is one coming out of Morgan State, and her colleague Latia Thomas, both they're co-presidents of the Apex chapter. We've interviewed supply chain dogs from from Georgia. Georgia Southern has an outstanding program, and their leader of their program there is really, really powerful individual. And of course, Georgia Tech, which was the original supply chain program sorry, Ben, but the original supply chain program in Georgia. It's just unbelievable what they're learning and what they're coming away with in terms of not just supply chain skills, but real world skills and awareness. And it's
absolutely,
it bodes very well for the industry.
Yeah.
Well, Keith, what you talked about earlier around, the analysis piece of supply chain now, that, you almost have to be somewhat of an engineer, to really understand and find different ways and be able to work with data effectively. I mean, that is just so key now. And it's really changed the way, really the skill set that's required for supply chain now.
Yeah, Keith was ahead of his time.
He was, ahead of his time. I mean, in so many ways, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
A STEM
I'm
school.
a pioneer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, with your emphasis on data, your emphasis on engineering and imagination, as Greg talked about earlier. I mean, we're in the information age, so little did you and all your classmates know just how much of a pioneer you were at the time.
Yeah.
So it's neat to have you here. I mean, really, it's you've got a very interesting story, and we hear so many different perspectives here from supply chain leaders across in different sectors, different positions, different functional areas. You have a very unique background and a unique take on not just the industry, but kind of the profession of supply chain management. So we'll have to have you back, and you have to give us an update on some of these macro issues. Yeah.
Well, you know what? Just let me know when you want to talk, and I am definitely available. It's been, great talking to you guys. It's been a really good experience. So thank you for inviting me, and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. All right, so let's make sure folks know how to connect with Keith Saunders. How can they connect with you, and then how can, of course, they learn more about Zep?
The easiest way probably to connect with me is via LinkedIn. So you can find my profile on LinkedIn, just Keith Saunders. But then you can also reach me, keith.saunders@zep.com. That's Zep, Z-E-P. The problem with reaching me via the Zep email is I get probably 300 emails a day, and a lot of them go to spam. So it's the easiest way is probably definitely going to be LinkedIn. But in order to find out more, about Zep, just go to zep.com, and then you can also go into Home Depot and Lowe's. You'll find a lot of our retail products there, as well as on Amazon.
Love it. It's just that simple. It's been a pleasure, Keith. All right, Ben, same question for you. How can our listeners connect with you and the Metro Atlanta Chamber?
Please feel free to reach out. My email is bharris@NACOC, as in Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce.com. Also on LinkedIn as well. Judging from how Keith and I actually met digitally through LinkedIn, actually, so it does work, I have to say.
It does work, yeah.
It does.
Indeed. And then you can find me on, I'm taking a break from Twitter, so probably won't find me on Twitter right now. But you can find me on Instagram and a couple other platforms as well. And also, for more information on the Metro Atlanta Chamber, just go to www.metroatlantachamberaltogether.com.
Outstanding. I think more folks we should all take a break from Twitter sometime. step back from the
Really
lid.
nice if everyone took a break from Twitter. Hey, Scott, how can people reach you? How can they connect with you? We never ask you that question.
Great question. So LinkedIn really, they've made some nice changes to help folks find each other. I love what they've done with the veteran community and giving up the free subscription level for veterans, especially in transition. So you can find us there. You can find us at supplychainnowradio.com. And of course, you can find us wherever you get your podcast from every day, Monday through Friday, sometimes Saturday and Sunday, and subscribe if you like what you hear.
I have to issue an invite. I'm sorry, Keith, next time you're at the plant in Emerson, give me about a day's notice. We'll have lunch at Doug's.
Sounds like
perfect. You can definitely do that.
You've gotten a special invite, Keith. I haven't gotten that invite yet, so you hurt my feelings here. No, kidding aside, what a great episode. Really appreciate the time, as busy as this panel is here. We've been speaking with Keith Saunders, Vice President of Sourcing, Direct Materials, and Sourced Finished Goods with Zep Incorporated. Thanks again, Keith. And Ben Harris, Director of Supply Chain Ecosystem with our friends there over at the Metro Atlanta Chamber. All right, Greg, great episode. I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend, wonderful summer as we're moving into August here, the dog days of summer, right, Greg?
Yes, sir. Oh my, it's look, first of all, there's a lot to take away from this episode. I'm not sure that I can really add to it. And you know how rare that is. I mean, that I feel like I can add to it, whether I can or not. But I just want to thank first, Ben, you for somehow connecting with Keith, and Keith, you for joining us. So really appreciate it. Yes, we're going to have to hunker down here in supply chain here in Georgia. It's too hot to go outside anyway, so we might as well be working.
All right, so on that note, and on behalf of our entire Supply Chain Now team, including Greg White, hey, this is Scott Luton challenging all of our audience as much as we challenge our own team. Hey, do good, give forward, be the change that's needed. And on that note, we'll see you next time here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.